You woke up this morning, made coffee at home or grabbed one on the way, took a taxi or the subway, scrolled past an ad. Buy now or wait. That's 3 economic decisions, and your day just started. By tonight, you'll make over 100 more. Now here's the tricky question. Where does your salary actually come from? Most people say, "My company pays me," or "the government transfers it." But that's not the whole truth. Your company isn't a magic chest of money. Your salary is born from a chain of decisions made by millions of people. Someone bought a product, another took out a loan, a third invested in technology, and this chain is called the economy. But here's what nobody tells you. Why did your favorite coffee shop raise prices when the beans cost the same? Why did the bank approve your loan in January but reject you in March? Why hasn't your salary increased even though your company reported record profits? And most importantly, how do economic news headlines invisibly control your life? Hold on. Before we dive into this research, I need to know something. Where are you joining from, and what time is it there right now? Country, city, local time? Put it all in the comments below. I really want to see how global this is. We see only the tip of the iceberg. Prices in stores, salary on our cards, taxi fares in apps. But beneath it lies an entire mechanism of supply chains, currency fluctuations, and regulatory decisions. And all of this directly impacts your everyday life. In 30 minutes, you'll have a simple framework that explains all these mysteries. Because economics isn't some abstract, complex concept. It's an instruction manual for the world we live in. Let me take you back to where it all started. To understand this system, we need to begin at the very beginning, at that moment when humans faced their first economic problem. Everything starts with one uncomfortable fact we prefer to ignore. Remember the coffee example? You're not choosing because you love making decisions. You're choosing because you can't have everything at once. Imagine you have $50 and 2 free hours on a Saturday. You want to go to the movies for $25 and buy good meat for dinner, also $25. Time-wise, you want to spend 1 hour meeting friends and 1 hour at the gym. But the day is finite. Money is finite. You have to choose. This is the fundamental economic problem. Resources are limited, but desires are infinite. You'll never have enough money, time, and energy for everything you want. Companies don't have budgets for all projects. Governments don't have money for all programs. Every choice is a compromise. Economists call it a trade-off. And what you gave up is the opportunity cost. This isn't the money you spent, but the value of the foregone opportunity. If you went to the movies, the opportunity cost isn't the $25 you spent. It's the pleasure you missed from that home-cooked dinner. This principle works everywhere. In 2020, governments worldwide faced a brutal choice: impose lockdowns, saving lives but losing part of the economy, or keep everything open, preserving jobs but risking citizens' health. The opportunity cost of lockdowns in the EU was approximately 11% of lost GDP in Q2 2020. But that was the price for preventing the healthcare system from collapsing. There are no right or wrong decisions, only conscious choices where you understand what you're sacrificing to get what you want. But if resources are limited, how did humanity manage to create such abundance? The secret is that humans figured out long ago that instead of doing dozens of tasks alone, it's better to do one thing exceptionally well. Scottish economist Adam Smith described this in 1776 using a pin factory example. One worker could barely make 20 pins a day. He had to cut wire, sharpen it, attach the head. But 10 workers, dividing the operations, stamped out 48,000 pins a day, 2,400 times more. Each focused on what they did best. One cuts wire, another sharpens, a third polishes. One word: specialization. This principle has reached unprecedented scales. Take the automotive industry. When Henry Ford introduced the assembly line in 1913, assembling one car took just 2.5 hours versus 12 hours of manual assembly. Today, specialization has gone even further. In South Korea, for instance, there are 1,000 industrial robots per 10,000 workers. That's a world record. Yet unemployment there is only around 3%. Robots perform routine work while people switch to more complex tasks. Even food delivery works on this principle. One restaurant makes sushi, another pizza, a third burgers. The courier doesn't cook because he specializes in fast delivery. The programmer writes the app, not delivering orders. The manager doesn't design mock-ups. Each does what they do best. In your profession, it's the same. Designers don't program. Programmers don't negotiate. Managers don't draw layouts. Everyone does what works best for them. Imagine if a courier decided to become self-sufficient, grow tomatoes, make cheese, bake bread, cook burgers, and only then deliver. How long would one order take? Several months? And how much would it cost? Like an airplane wing. Specialization isn't just about efficiency. It's about the fact that no country, no company can do everything alone. Everyone depends on each other, and this dependence creates trade. But how do you determine what an hour of a courier's work is worth and how much a kilogram of tomatoes costs? Who decides that a fair price for sushi is $20 and for pizza $15? This is where the next mechanism of economics comes into play: the market. It's a place where those who want to buy meet those willing to sell. Sounds simple, but this is where the main miracle of economics happens. Prices form themselves. How does this work? Imagine a rainy Friday evening. You're standing on the street soaking wet, rushing home. You open your rideshare app, and the price is 1.5 times higher than usual. Why? Because the rain suddenly increased demand for rides. Everyone wants to go, nobody wants to walk. There are the same number of cars on the road, but far more people wanting them. Demand rose, supply didn't change, and the price went up. This high price immediately does two things. Some passengers decide to wait out the rain or walk. Demand drops slightly, and drivers, seeing the high fare, come online. Supply grows. Somewhere at this point, when the number of passengers and cars match, the price stabilizes, and the market finds equilibrium. Nobody sat in a command center calculating the right fare for a rainy evening. Though modern algorithms work smarter, they raise prices not only when demand has risen, but when it's expected. As soon as rain starts, fares automatically increase, but the essence with demand remains the same. Now remember the initial question. Why did coffee at your favorite cafe get more expensive even though beans cost the same? It's simple. If the rent increased, the cafe raises prices too. Gas got more expensive. Delivery costs rose. The barista's salary went up. Personnel expenses increased. The price of coffee isn't just the cost of beans. But there's a nuance. If bread in the store goes up 50% tomorrow, you'll still buy it because it's a basic necessity. But if a new iPhone goes up the same 50%, many will simply wait or choose something simpler. Economists call this elasticity. For example, demand for bread is inelastic. It barely reacts to price. But demand for iPhones is elastic, and price plays a decisive role here. The same principle works with salaries. The labor market is also a market. If there are many specialists in your field, employers have no reason to raise salaries even with record company profits. Money goes to shareholders or business development. But if there's a labor shortage, salaries skyrocket. That's why your salary might not grow despite your company's success. That's why during crises, necessities get expensive first. In 2022, Global natural gas prices jumped more than threefold. Post-COVID economic recovery coincided with supply cuts. People can't refuse heating, so they're willing to pay more. But the luxury goods market sags. Expensive watches, jewelry, premium cars, all of this can be postponed. So the market is an endless negotiation between millions of buyers and sellers, and each price is a compromise between what some are willing to pay and what others are willing to sell for. There's one thing without which these negotiations would be impossible. How do you compare a loaf of bread and an hour of a programmer's work? You need a universal language of value, and that language is money. Imagine a world without money. You're a programmer who wants to buy bread. You go to the baker and say, "Give me a loaf and I'll make you a website." The baker replies, "No, I don't need a website. Better cut my hair." You go to the barber and say, "Listen, cut his hair and I'll write you a program." The barber responds, "No, I don't need a program. Better bring me milk." See the problem? You need to find someone who simultaneously needs your service and has what you need. Economists call this the double coincidence of wants problem, and it's solved simply with money. Money performs three functions. First, medium of exchange. Instead of barter, you sell your services for money and use that money to buy bread. Simple and convenient. Second, measure of value. How do you compare an hour of programming work and a kilogram of potatoes? Through money. Say your hour costs $40 and potatoes are $2 per kilo. That means an hour of programming equals 20 kilos of potatoes. Third function, store of value. You cannot spend money today, but save it for tomorrow, next month, for retirement. Money allows you to transfer purchasing power through time. But here's the catch. Money must retain value. And what if it starts losing value? That's when inflation begins, the rise in the general price level. How is it measured? Different countries calculate differently, but the principle is the same. They take a basket of goods and services that an average family buys and watch how its cost changes. In the US, this basket consists of about 1/3 housing expenses. Another 16% is transportation, 14% food. In Europe, the structure is slightly different, more weight on food and energy. As of August 2025, U.S. inflation stands at 2.9%, having held at 2.7% in June and July. For example, if inflation is 10% per year, then coffee that cost $4 a year ago now costs $4.40. Your savings in the account haven't formally changed, but you can buy less with them. This mechanism works the same everywhere. In the US in 2022, inflation reached 9%. In Germany, 10.5%. But in Turkey, inflation approached nearly 90%. Prices practically doubled every year. The result is the same everywhere. When prices rise, money loses purchasing power. What yesterday cost $18, today costs $19. Your savings melt away. And if prices fall, deflation begins. The reverse process. Sounds tempting, but people postpone purchases, waiting for even greater declines. Demand falls, and the economy freezes. That's why central banks in developed countries try to keep inflation around 2% per year. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England all do this, low enough to preserve savings and high enough so people don't lose the desire to buy. So money is the foundation of the modern economy. But where does it come from, and who decides how much should be in circulation? Here we need to understand the role of banks. Banks aren't just money storage facilities. They literally create money. Sounds like magic, but it's quite straightforward. When you deposit $10,000, the bank doesn't lock it in a vault. It keeps a small portion, say $1,000, as a reserve, and lends the remaining $9,000 to another client. Then that client buys something, the seller receives $9,000 and also deposits it in a bank. The bank again keeps $900 as reserve and lends the rest to the next borrower, and so on. In the end, your initial $10,000 turned into $100,000 in loans across the economy. Banks connect those who have extra money with those who need money. But most importantly, they determine the price of money. This price is called the interest rate. If a bank lends at 15% but accepts deposits at 10%, the 5% difference is its profit. Where do these percentages come from? Here, the central bank plays a decisive role. It sets the so-called key rate, the percentage at which commercial banks can borrow money from the government. Right now, for example, the key rate in the US is around 4.25, 4.50%, in the Eurozone around 2.15%, and in Russia 17%. All of them rose from near zero levels over the past 2 to 3 years. A simple question arises here. If even governments and corporations depend on central bank decisions and the global monetary system, how can an ordinary person protect capital in such an environment? For many, the answer becomes cryptocurrencies, an asset that lives by its own rules, not directly dependent on political decisions. But as you understand, there's a catch. Most people enter the market blindly and quickly lose money. Now back to our topic. If the central bank raises the rate, loans become more expensive. It becomes unprofitable for people and companies to borrow. They spend and invest less. Demand in the economy falls, and inflation slows. That's exactly why the bank might approve your loan in January but reject you in March. When the central bank raised the rate, it became more expensive for banks to borrow money, and they tightened requirements for borrowers. But if the central bank lowers the rate, the opposite happens. Loans get cheaper, everyone starts spending more, and the economy heats up. There's one thing that shows how confident the financial system feels. The yield curve, a graph showing interest rates on government bonds of different maturities. Usually, long-term bonds yield more than short-term ones. Logical. The longer the term, the greater the risk. But sometimes everything flips, and 2-year bonds start yielding more than 10-year ones. This is called yield curve inversion. Why does this happen? Imagine the central bank raised the rate to 5% to cool an overheated economy. But investors think a downturn is coming soon, and the central bank will lower the rate to 2%. So they're willing to buy 10-year bonds even at 4%. It'll still be more profitable than getting 2% in a year. In the US, such curve flipping has almost always predicted recession. Over the past 60 years, it preceded 9 out of 10 downturns. Currently, the yield curve has been inverted for over a year. This is one of the signals that the economy may slow down soon. The financial system is the circulatory system of the economy. When it works, money flows to where it's needed most. When banks stop lending, the economy suffocates. The financial system doesn't work on its own. Behind it stand government institutions, including the central bank. Formally, it's independent from the government, but together they're responsible for ensuring the economy doesn't overheat or go into a tailspin. The state's role overall is much broader. It does 2 main things: collects taxes and spends money. Sounds like a joke, but these actions dramatically affect the entire economy. When you buy coffee for $4, part of that amount, sales tax, goes to the budget. When you receive a salary, the government takes income tax. The company pays profit tax. And then the government spends this money on teacher salaries, road construction, pensions, the military. And here's where something interesting happens. In normal times, the government collects and spends roughly equally. But when a crisis begins, everything changes automatically. Imagine a recession started. People lose jobs. They earn less, so they pay less income tax. Companies make less profit, so taxes from them are also less. But government spending grows, need to pay unemployment benefits, support those affected. It turns out that in a crisis, the budget automatically goes into deficit. The government takes less money from the economy and adds more. This supports demand when it's especially needed. Economists call these automatic stabilizers. In the 2008 crisis, the U.S. budget deficit grew from 3% of GDP to almost 10%. About half of this growth was automatic stabilizers at work, the rest special support programs. But the government can also act purposefully, lower taxes or increase spending to stimulate the economy. In parallel, the central bank works. It's independent from the government, but the goal is common: not let the economy either overheat or collapse. When the government spends a lot of money and the central bank keeps rates low, the economy gets a powerful boost. But if they act at cross purposes, one stimulates, the other breaks, the effect is much weaker. What about government debt? When the government spends more than it collects, it borrows the missing amount by issuing bonds. U.S. government debt is now about 119% of GDP as of Q2 2025. In Japan, it's 260%. In Germany, 65%. Sounds scary, but as long as investors trust the country and are willing to buy its bonds at a reasonable rate, the system works. Problems start when trust disappears. Then investors demand an increasingly high percentage for risk, and debt servicing eats up more and more of the budget. The market can do a lot, but not everything. It's great at determining prices for coffee and taxis. But who will build the roads these taxis drive on? Who will ensure the safety in which cafes operate? Who will teach children and treat the sick? The government indeed forms the foundation of the economy. But one country's foundation is only part of the building. After all, no economy today exists in isolation. But how do you even measure and compare the size of these economies? For this, they invented GDP, Gross Domestic Product. It's the value of all goods and services a country produced in a year. Baked bread, cut hair, sold a car, built a house, everything is summed up. By nominal GDP, the U.S. leads with $30.5 trillion, China with $19.2 trillion, and Germany with $4.74 trillion as of 2025. But there's a nuance. If you recalculate by purchasing power parity, that is, consider that many goods in China are cheaper, the Chinese economy is already larger than the American one. Simply put, a country's economy is like an apartment in a large building. Inside, there are its own rules, its own furniture, its own residence habits. But the utilities are shared: water, electricity, elevator. And if the power goes out in the building, the individual apartment also plunges into darkness. We see examples of this every day. Taiwan, for instance, produces about 60% of all microchips in the world. And if something happens there, auto plants from Detroit to Stuttgart will stop. The chip shortage in early 2020 forced automakers to keep finished cars in parking lots for months. They were simply waiting for chips for onboard computers. All these flows are accounted for in the balance of payments, a sort of country's accounting book. How much they sold abroad, how much they bought, how much they borrowed or invested. Germany and China have recorded surpluses for years. That's when exports exceed imports. The U.S., on the contrary, lives with a deficit, buying more than it sells. This is where exchange rates are built. The higher the demand for a country's goods and assets, the stronger its currency. That's why the dollar remains the world's reserve currency. It's needed for trading oil, gas, technologies. The U.S. can afford a trade balance deficit because the whole world is willing to hold dollars as the most reliable currency. Turns out an interesting scheme. The U.S. buys goods from the whole world, paying in dollars, and other countries either accumulate these dollars as reserves or invest them back in American bonds. The U.S. gets real goods, and the world gets paper. But everyone accepts this paper because they trust the American economy. If trust falls, the national currency weakens, as has happened more than once in Turkey or Argentina. The global economy is a web of mutual dependencies, and the denser this web, the faster shocks spread. The same mortgage crisis in the US in 2008 turned into a global financial storm within months. That's why, talking about economics, you can't limit yourself to just taxes, salaries, or the central bank rate. All this works inside the apartment, but the apartment itself is built into a huge building where one resident's failure is felt by the entire entrance. This global web lives unevenly. It breathes, expands, then contracts. The economy moves in cycles, and understanding these waves helps predict what will come tomorrow. Imagine a graph where time is horizontal and the economy's size is vertical. The line goes up, but not straight. It rises, reaches a peak, then falls, reaches a bottom, and rises again. Rise, fall, recovery, and so on in a circle. Why do these cycles happen? The economy is millions of people making decisions simultaneously. Sometimes everyone suddenly becomes optimistic. They buy more, invest, hire employees. Then demand grows. Prices rise. Profits increase. Everyone feels richer and spends even more. But at some point, something breaks. Maybe the central bank raised rates to cool the overheating. Maybe a bubble burst in the tech market, like in 2001 with internet companies. Maybe an external shock occurred. The mood changes, people start saving, companies start laying off, banks lend less. During downturns, unemployment grows. People lose jobs because firms cut production. In the US during the early 2000s recession, unemployment rose from 4% to 6.5%. And inflation usually slows because there's little demand and prices can't rise. But the economy is a resilient thing. Gradually, opportunities appear. Assets have gotten cheaper, you can invest profitably. Demand slowly recovers, companies start hiring again, and the economy grows. A full cycle from peak to peak averages 6 to 10 years, but each time is different. There are signals that help understand where we are in the cycle. If the business activity index holds below 50 for several months, there's a high probability of recession. If unemployment benefit claims are rising, the labor market is weakening. If consumer confidence indices are falling, people are preparing for the worst. There are other signals of approaching problems. For example, when unemployment benefit claims start rising, it means companies are preparing for cuts. Or when consumer confidence indices fall, people sense trouble and prepare to tighten their belts. Economic cycles aren't a system malfunction, they're its natural rhythm. And understanding it, you can better plan for the future. Economic cycles are influenced by everything, from investor sentiment to volcanic eruptions. But if previously these factors acted slowly and locally, now everything has accelerated and globalized. In 1973, Arab countries raised oil prices, and the whole world plunged into a 2-year recession. But in 2021, a container ship blocked the Suez Canal for just 6 days, and global trade lost $9 billion per day. See how everything accelerated? If previously years passed from shock to consequences, today a few days are enough. The rules of this game are changing right now. And there are 3 forces rewriting the economic map of the world. First force: technology is developing at breakneck speed. Artificial intelligence could dramatically accelerate economic growth in the coming years. Countries leading in chip development and AI, the US, China, Taiwan, gain an advantage. But educated personnel are needed, otherwise there's little use. Second force: climate. This is no longer talk about the future but concrete losses in company reports. In 2022, global investments in renewable energy reached $500 billion, more than was invested in oil and gas extraction. But climate risks can annually eat 1 to 2% of GDP in vulnerable economies. Nature has become an unpredictable player in economic markets. Third factor, demography. Developed countries are aging at an unprecedented rate. In China, for example, by 2022, the population declined for the first time, and by 2030, the share of people over 65 will exceed 16%. Now it's about 14%. Who then will work, buy, and pay taxes? But in Africa, the opposite, a demographic explosion. By estimates, by 2050, every fourth person on the planet will live there. The future economy will become faster, more unpredictable, but also more flexible. Crises will become sharper, but recovery will also be faster. The main thing is that basic principles won't change. People will still choose between alternatives, specialize, trade, go through cycles of growth and decline. Understanding these fundamentals, you can navigate any chaos. And for the average person, this means one thing. Adaptation skills are becoming more important than stability. The economy of the future rewards those who can quickly learn and switch between tasks. We started with a morning cup of coffee and got to global economic cycles. Seemingly things from different worlds, but actually they're parts of one system. Where does your salary come from? Now it's clear that it's composed of a chain of decisions. Someone bought your company's product. They had money, possibly taken as a loan. The bank gave this loan because the rate allowed it. And the rate turned out that way because the central bank tried to maintain balance between growth and inflation. Your everyday choices are woven into the global economy, and the global economy's decisions return to your life through store prices, loan conditions, new vacancies, or layoffs. You buy coffee, and it becomes part of GDP. Take out a mortgage, and it's reflected in the money supply. Your work creates value that spreads throughout the world through goods and services. When you see these connections, news about prices, rates, and crises stops seeming like chaos. Behind them emerges understandable logic, those very principles we talked about today. And most importantly, these principles won't disappear. The future will bring new technologies, challenges, and opportunities. But resources will still be limited. People will still choose between alternatives. The economy will go through its cycles of growth and decline. First, your individual financial decisions aren't isolated events. They're threads in a global economic fabric. Understanding this connection gives you power to make better choices. Second, economic cycles are inevitable, not failures. Preparation beats panic. When you understand the rhythm, you can position yourself for opportunity instead of scrambling during crisis. Third, the skills that matter most now are adaptability and financial literacy. The world is changing faster than ever. Those who understand economic fundamentals and can adjust quickly will thrive. We're at a unique moment in history. U.S. debt stands at 119% of GDP. Inflation remains elevated at 2.9%. Interest rates are at multi-year highs. The yield curve has been inverted, a recession indicator that's been accurate 9 out of 10 times historically. These aren't reasons to fear, but reasons to prepare. Start seeing the economy not as something that happens to you, but as a system you participate in and can understand. Every purchase, every savings decision, every career choice. You're not just reacting to the economy, you're creating it. The question isn't whether you're part of this system. You already are. The question is, will you understand it well enough to navigate it successfully? Now tell me, what in this system seems most important to you? The money connecting everyone? The technology changing the rules? Or the people and their millions of decisions that make up the economy? Thanks for watching till the end. If you're here, you're one of those who want to understand how the financial system really works. Subscribe, new research tomorrow, and drop a comment. What do you think about this? Your perspective matters.